Thank you all for coming today. This is a great crowd. I'm sorry for the delay. We're waiting for Provost Abdulrahman because this is the Provost Lecture Series after all. But I know we're tight on time, so we'll just take a chance and go ahead and start without him. So I would like to introduce to you Ghadir Al-Shimi, who is the Interim Dean of the Academy of Liberal Arts and the Office of Undergraduate Studies and the Core Curriculum, who will introduce our speaker today.
Does this work? Okay. I'll just stand here. It's too high. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today Dr. Carra Leah Hood, Associate Provost for Strategic Planning, Academic Programming, and Assessment at Stockton University, New Jersey. Dr. Hood received her undergraduate degree in African and Puerto Rican Latino Studies from Hunter College, the City University of New York. She attended Yale to receive an MA in African Studies and a PhD in Comparative Literature. She has broad interdisciplinary interests and is a prominent scholar on a variety of academic and administrative topics, as well as being a creative writer. Dr. Hood's areas of expertise represent the microcosm of all that is academia. She oversees academic planning and assessment for the Office of the Provost, supports development of new and existing academic programs, supervises academic directors, provides vision and leadership in executing university missions, and coordinates assessment, accreditation, curricula, global engagement, and academic quality. In her faculty role, Dr. Hood has coordinated the writing minor, chaired the General Studies Committee of the Faculty Senate for several terms, represented the School of General Studies on the Senate, and been engaged with overseeing professional development and research in diverse areas. She has also worked on advancing high-impact teaching practices, including experiential and evidence-based learning, and is active in initiatives that promote equity and inclusiveness for students. As we celebrate our centennial year and reflect upon our role as educators, Dr. Hood's visit is especially valuable to AUC as a liberal arts institution. The topic of the talk today, Teaching for Transfer, underlines the importance of our common vision as educators, striving to create meaningful and seamless learning experiences to help our students prepare for the lifelong process of learning. In this vision, course content is not an end in itself, but a vehicle for developing student skills that will position them as critical thinkers and intentional learners, extending their learning to address new problems and unscripted futures. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hood and thanking her for being part of our centennial celebrations of learning. Please, do you want to stand here? Or?
Thanks so much. I want to thank everybody for being part of the invitation to bring me here. I'm just thrilled to be here to be sharing with you some of what I've learned over the course of my academic experience, but also to initiate and participate in a conversation with you about the place you're at, which is the place Stockton is also at right now, where we're seeing many transitions taking place in higher ed and many transitions taking place in our particular departments. Transfer of learning, which is the topic for today and Wednesday's lectures, has to do with some broad-based understandings that all of us share in our teaching experience, and that is that students actually learn what it is that we claim to be teaching them and what we desire to be teaching them. I think all of us know that that's not always exactly the case. And so we want to figure out how it is that we can become more intentional about teaching for transfer so that students are actually learning to transfer the knowledge that they acquire in one class, in another class, in one class, into their personal lives, from classes into their work lives, and from work and their personal lives back into their school lives. That porousness is not easy to accomplish, and in the past, I think, has been taken for granted. So the conversation that you're initiating on your campus is a really vitally important one, because it recognizes the necessity of being intentional about the work that we're doing. So in today's presentation, what I'd like to do is lay the groundwork, theoretical and practical, for teaching for transfer and learning to transfer knowledge and skills on the part of students. So I want to look at theory, I want to look at a little bit of practical application, one example, and draw some conclusions about the work that's been done so that we can move to a more strategic conversation at Wednesday's lecture. So both of these lectures are connected, and today is the groundwork for a more strategic discussion next time. So, we're not moving. Oops. All right. I guess we did move, but not through this. All righty. One segundo. Yes, please. Just go back to the second one. Okay, good. Yeah, why wasn't it working? Okay, never mind. Okay. Okay, so I call this lecture "The Problem Not Teaching for Transfer." It had another title at another point, and that's a little bit more descriptive, so I'll share it with you. Teaching so that students remember what they learn. The basic definition of teaching for transfer is knowledge or skills that are acquired in one context being applied in another context. And we can think of any number of ways in which we expect students to do this when we've asked students to do this in our classes. The example that I've provided here is from math, where a student might learn particular kinds of skills in one class. Elementary school teacher, adding and subtracting might be one of their goals, and by the time the student gets to high school, you expect them to remember how to add and subtract, that you don't in fact have to teach them that again. So that's a basic understanding of teaching for transfer. We make all of these assumptions about teaching for transfer that we need to really interrogate significantly. One is that teaching, what we do in the classroom, leads to learning on the part of students. Students generally learn something in our classes, but they may not learn exactly what it is that we think they're learning when we set the goals for our teaching. And we need to have a mechanism for figuring out how to gauge the success of our teaching in terms of students learning. So all students successfully learn what they were previously taught. They don't. You know, and in fact, some students get C's, some students get D's in previous courses, and we think the fact that they moved through their courses means that they must have been successful to some degree, but not all students received an A. Those that received B's and C's may need a little bit of help as they move along, and I think as teachers we know this, so we try to remediate as we instruct in the classroom. Learning at one point will, this is another assumption, learning at one point will presuppose that students actually are able to recollect that knowledge at another point. They might not. Just as a personal example, I remembered what a nematode was years after I had taken biology. Not that it really served me particularly well at that time, but I did remember it. And I do remember also that the calf muscle is called gastrocnemius. These are random bits of things that one learns at one point and then is able to recall at another point. But the context, the importance, any kind of connected knowledge to that, none of that do I actually remember now. So students are taught knowledge and skills in one context. They should be able to apply that knowledge and those skills in an entirely different context. We assume this. For instance, if they take first-year writing, they should then be able to use first-year writing skills, all that they've learned there about information literacy, when they go into a research writing class in their discipline. And we know, unfortunately, that they frequently don't remember. all that we taught them, especially about information literacy and citation practices and how to do research and how to actually investigate what they find on the internet for its validity as sources for a research paper in their discipline. Teachers do not need to reteach what students were taught in the past. This is absolutely false. And again, like I think many of us know it as writing and rhetoric teachers because we focus so much on pedagogy. But teachers outside of our discipline may not be as mindful about the fact that students do need to be reminded, and they need to have reviews of information that they actually learned in a previous semester. Something that will happen if a teacher, especially a discipline teacher, starts to understand the extent to which students need to be retaught particular types of skills and knowledge is that some other content intended for that level of a class will have to be either dropped or accommodated in the class in a different way. So that's a big important point, which I think we should keep in mind. Teaching, all teaching, is teaching for transfer. We believe that. When we teach, we want students to be able to remember as they move along. And we believe that teaching leads to learning for transfer as well. I think we believe that, and I think it's in fact true in part, but it's not true entirely. So again, like these are assumptions that we need to be thinking about strategically, first of all, but we also need to be critiquing on our own part. And the extent to which we share these assumptions is real. I mean, I've shared these as well as a teacher. Research has indicated that the teaching for transfer emerges in particular circumstances, and I think it's really important to know that the conversation emerges in our worlds. It's not always here. It's only here sometimes, and those times are now. So that's why I think your conversation about teaching for transfer and the conversation that is being initiated on my campus as well, these conversations are emerging under very similar conditions at your university and at our university, and that is changing demographics. Our student populations are changing, and that means different things here than it means where I am. Where I am, it means that we're having a lot more adult and first generation college students. It also means that the diversity is very different at my school. You all can think about the ways that the changing demographics is informing your student population, but these are the ways that it's informing ours. We're getting students who are not as well prepared for college as students were in previous generations, and we're getting students that need a lot more remediation. So that's part of what we're experiencing, and I think there's probably something similar. Some similar demographic shifts taking place here as well. There's economic challenges. In my context, our school is just increasing in cost astronomically, and that's happening all over the United States. And those economic challenges are leading students to go to loans, and when they take out loans, those loans accumulate over 4 to 5 years, and as they accumulate over 4 to 5 years, the students are graduating with significant amounts of debt. And those significant amounts of debt are leading to various kinds of attitudinal changes on the part of the college population. They really want to be able to pay off those debts, for instance, and paying off those debts means that they tend to go for more vocationally focused majors while they're in college. State and federal funding, what the complement is in Egypt is similar, that some institutions are receiving funding from the state. Our state and federal funding is diminishing fairly significantly from about 80% of the funding for our state institutions at one point when I first started at Stockton about 10 years ago, now to about 8%. So that has meant that tuition has got to fuel all of the economics of the school. So again, teaching for transfer emerges in these situations because you want to be more efficient about what you're doing on your campus. You want to make sure that students are learning so that they can get through in 4 years so that they don't have huge debts. And you're also working with a population that has more needs for support than previous generations might have had. We also have the pressure externally to demonstrate the value of the liberal arts. And I know from conversations that I've had on this campus that that's also a very big concern here, that the value of a liberal arts education really does need to be justified and spoken about and shared with students, shared with their parents, and shared with the community at large, including employers, in order for the liberal arts education to thrive as I think we would like it to. A complement to that is that there's public interest in vocational training, that is training for a job, a specific job. So that I also know from conversations that I've had on your campus is a real concern here at AUC. So some of these, although a little bit different, some of these concerns are a little bit different. They're actually also taking place here in an Egyptian context, as they're taking place in a New Jersey and U.S. context for us. So then, in these circumstances, we get transfer conversations. Perkins and Solomon were one of the original researchers on teaching for transfer, and they wrote an article in 1988 which has a lot of currency in academic circles, and this article was titled Teaching for Transfer, and it was published in a journal called Educational Leadership. Which means that it goes to an audience that's not necessarily faculty members. I mean, I think that's important to point out. An educational leadership journal would be more likely read by administrators. In educational institutions, also might be read by faculty members in educational leadership programs, which are generally programs that are focused on leadership in K through 12 contexts, let's say. So anyway, this has a specific audience, which may not have been a wide enough audience for the import of what it had to say. So it took a while for their message to make it to other fields in academia. They argue in their article that transfer is a learned skill. It's not just osmosis. It's not just something that we can expect on the part of students. It's not automatic. It doesn't occur as a result of really good teaching. It needs to be taught. So students need to know how to transfer what they learn. And we need to have a way, pedagogically, of instructing them in that skill. And it needs to be reinforced, which means that it may need to be taught more than once. So it may need to be taught across the curriculum as opposed to in one single course. Also, I'm going to point out here that in italics I wrote that transfer exceeds ordinary learning. And ordinary learning they defined as the acquisition of particular knowledge and skills. I'm going to reframe that a little bit to say that this is the kind of knowledge that, content knowledge that's memorized. So content knowledge that's memorized may actually be remembered, like gastrocnemius. That may actually be remembered from, 8th grade biology till, adulthood. Times when you shouldn't be remembering gastrocnemius, you should be remembering other things, right? Just to continue that thought, transfer does not take care of itself. Conventional schooling, our schooling in higher ed as well as K through 12 pays little attention to it generally, but it can be done. So it's basic to our expectations. It's basic to our understanding of what it is that we're doing when we're engaging pedagogically with students, but we don't do it intentionally. And so it's the intentional part that we're looking for today and through this week. Okay, so there's a number of ways and a number of reasons why transfer of teaching does not lead to transfer of learning. Okay, and I'm just going to read through these really quickly and then talk about them a bit. The knowledge or skills may not have been well learned in the first place. That is, students may have gotten a C- or a D, or they just may not have learned them very well. The knowledge or skills are adequately learned, but no instruction takes place about when to use this knowledge or skills, so they're well learned, but they're in a vacuum. right? So students don't understand that they can take that skill and they can use it over here, or they can use it in their personal life, or they can use it at work when this happens. They don't really understand that. So they can't grasp on to these knowledge and skills in particular contexts because we haven't showed them how to do that. Passive learning may not transfer as predictably as active learning. And active learning means high-impact practices, hands-on learning, project-based learning, community-based learning, any learning that's experiential. Sometimes research learning is considered experiential and actually has an experiential component. Students may go to a conference, for instance. So anything that's experiential where students do it, they do it in stages, they do it in a scaffolded way where the learning grows over the course of the assignment, where they're out in the world and bringing knowledge back and forth. Any of those kinds of contexts are considered active learning, and transfer of learning tends to have better outcomes in those circumstances. Much of our learning, however, occurs in discrete classes with discrete outcomes, with discrete grades, and students don't necessarily have an opportunity within the context of the 15-week class to do anything hands-on and or to reach outside of the class with the learning that they've acquired to see how it works out there. As you all know, this is a really experimental time for students. As a traditional age student is experimenting with all sorts of things and figuring out what the limits of this or that are. Their learning is also part of that. So we want them to be able to experiment. We want them to be reaching outside of their classrooms, from one classroom to another, from the classroom outside, from the classroom inside, into their own internal life, to be doing reflective thinking, and or to reassess what happened to them in the past. So we want them to be doing all of that, and that's part of their experimentation at this point. Perkins and Solomon posited two different types of transfer. One is called low road, the other is called high road. And low road transfers are reflexive, so they're like the doctor hitting your knee. They just automatically happen, like driving a car and then driving a truck, right? You learn how to drive the car. That might be difficult, but driving the truck is pretty easy because you've already learned how to drive the car. There's another type of transfer that's called high road transfer, and these depend on, in quotes, deliberate, mindful abstraction of skill or knowledge for one context and application to another. So this is a cognitive process. Students have to think about it. We have to think about it as well. We transfer learning all the time too. And we transfer learning in relation to our students from one class to another. And when we do that, we have to do a little bit of abstraction. We have to do a little bit of intellectual work. So this becomes reflective as opposed to reflexive, which is the low road transfer. So it really is the high road transfer that I think we're all talking about. We're not necessarily talking about the low road, the low road reflexive transfer. I think we're talking about this kind that requires intellectual work on the part of students, and we can teach how to, what are the tools to actually be able to perform this intellectual work very well. So low road transfers do occur all the time in education. They occur around reading. They occur around writing, The student doesn't have to be retaught how to write their name, for instance. They don't have to be retaught how to read particular words on a page if they've already learned them. So we don't have to do anything about that. For some reason, students learn those skills and they're able to continue. They learn how to ride a bike, they're able to ride a bike again. So for some reason, students can do this kind of work. Other kinds of work that are associated with those skills, however, do require some instruction. Vocabulary building may require some instruction. Oh, okay. And textual interpretation and implications of rhetorical devices, for instance. Parsing a text, right? Figuring out what a text is really trying to share with us is also something that we have to think about. And there are various strategies that Perkins and Solomon put forth for high road transfer of learning. And one is creating actively on the part of the teacher in pedagogical ways, similar context, so that high road transferring, right, that is the more intellectual transfer, mimics low road transfer. So it looks like students are just actually, reflexively applying the the knowledge that they learned previously. And that's a trick. I don't know if all of us can pull that off, but if we can, I think that's a very, very successful strategy. Bridging. Performing the transfer as a class exercise. So you make students transfer it somehow by giving them an assignment that reaches outside the class to see how well the class knowledge works in that context, coming back to the class and talking about it. Talking about not only how well it worked, but also what they could do to make it work better if it didn't work quite so well. Creating project-based assignments, again, active learning, leveraging interdisciplinary strategies. We're going to talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday, but I will say that breaking through the disciplines, because that requires connection, because it requires reaching from one discipline to another, and making connections actively on the part of students can actually be really great for transfer of learning. Connecting local to general knowledge, what happened to you then can become generalized in one way or another, and having students actively moving back and forth between me and the world, right? To see where they're fitting into the world and how they're reflexively thinking about their location in the world in relation to everybody else's location. That's great. That's great kinds of work for students to think about transfer. Providing tools for reflection in all sorts of ways. And I'm going to come back to this one for just a minute right before I stop. And teaching how to learn for transfer. So we have to be actively involved in doing that teaching. So providing tools for reflection. I think a lot of us do that in rhetoric and composition, and a lot of us do it in other contexts as well. I know our nursing program has a very robust reflection protocol within its pedagogy. But lots of our reflection goes like this. How'd it go? What did you do? What do you think about what you did? Not that that's bad. That's actually step one of any kind of reflective scaffolding. But the next time students do reflection, don't you want to ask them something else that takes them a little bit deeper? And after that, wouldn't you want to ask them something else that takes them a little bit deeper? So I would encourage us to think about how to scaffold, how to build reflection deeper and deeper and deeper for students, so that we can create prompts and create practices in students that allow them to think about themselves in ways that they maybe haven't before, when thinking about their work for school. So their work for school needs to become part of who they are, not this separate thing that they're just doing to get their grades so they can get their job, so they can become their real person. Their schoolwork is actually part and integrated into all that they do. I'm going to stop here because I've been told that I have 5 minutes, and I really do want this to be conversational because that's the overall goal. I do have a few more things to say here, but I'll incorporate them into the lecture on Wednesday. So thank you very much. I hope this was interesting for you.
Hello, test. So we'd like to give you a chance to ask Dr. Hood some questions. Anybody in the audience have a question for Dr. Hood? Yes.
Dr. Hood, you mentioned at the beginning of the lecture that there are different mechanisms that you can use to gauge the success of teaching for transfer. Can you mention a few of those to us?
I'm going to talk about a few in more detail on Wednesday, but right now I'll just briefly outline some of the ones that I've been thinking about. One of them is to create a teaching for transfer class that students take. So in addition to other requirements, students might, a university might ask students to actually take a teaching for transfer class. It can be for 0 credit, it can be for 1 credit, 2 credit, 3 credit, 4 credit, whatever. It also could be a lab that's attached maybe to their writing class, or a lab that's attached to another class for 1 or 2 credits for students. So that's an idea that's been propagated. There's been some research done on it, and outcomes of a teaching for transfer class I actually have to present next time. So there has been some success. That method may not work for everybody, though. So one of the things that I would also propose is that we might think about having teaching for transfer module in multiple classes throughout, like multiple touch points for students throughout their education. And the module may look a little bit different from time to time, just because you don't want students to be getting the same lesson. So that would take some coordination among faculty members, I think. But I think it could be done to have a module. And the module could be free-floating. We use, where I am, we use Blackboard as our LMS, and we have a lot of free-floating modules in Blackboard, some of which faculty members have just created for other faculty members' use if they're interested. I created one for APA style, and that one is used widely across the university for all faculty members. I think it's possible to do something like that for transfer of learning. In addition to transfer of learning, though, what I would do if I was going a module route is I would also create one for pedagogy with tips for faculty members and resources for faculty members so that they could use the transfer for learning module with students, but they could also get some professional development assistance from the teaching for transfer, for the teaching for transfer one. So I would do that. A third strategy that I would think of is something like linked classes. I don't know if you all have those. We have one example which is used purely for remediation at my school, but there are some faculty members who are thinking about this in their program in really creative ways. And I think teaching for transfer fits into this a little bit. And that is in a first-year class they might ask, or first or second-year class, they might ask students to do a particular assignment that requires writing, maybe requires research, some sort of hands-on experiential work. And in their senior year, students in the same program will go back to that assignment, bring that assignment forward, and work on it in their fourth year, in one way or another. So if they did an experiential assignment, they might then regroup with the folks that they worked with on the experiential assignment and go farther. They might have written a personal essay earlier on in their education, and they go into the fourth year wanting to do some research. So to add research to a personal essay so that the personal and the universal can actually be brought together. So things like that where like two classes are actually working together to reinforce the learning in each one. So things like that.
Another question? Question? Okay, and if you could, please introduce yourself and tell Dr. Hood where you work or if you're a student and what level.
I'm Mahabeli from the Center for Learning and Teaching. Thank you for your talk. I had a question when I support faculty sometimes with this kind of thing, especially those who teach in liberal arts courses. And I know some of them do it in different ways, and I was just wondering, to teach for transfer, do you need to know necessarily the new context, or is it more about helping the students abstract what they've learned and asking them to decide how they're going to transfer either to their personal lives, professional lives, academic lives, what usually happens, or?
Well, I mean, I think it would be all of our best hopes that students will be able to do this on their own. But I think they probably won't do it on their own without us giving them some help. And so I think actually providing the connections is really important, or at least providing the context for students to be making the connections. Okay. If we could be providing the context for them to do that, then after they see these things work in a context or not work in a context without some retooling, and then they go back to the context and try again, I think it's really important for us to be there providing that kind of guidance. In some of the literature, it's called pathways. So I think we can help students build pathways out of our classes and back into our classes. And so I would say that we should be actively involved in doing that. Sometimes this requires breaking through a structure that's in place. And one of the structures, I think, for transfer of learning that's really critical is finding ways to break through the integrity of a class. And there's lots of ways to do this. One is e-portfolios, which allows students to archive their work and to reflect on their work over time. E-portfolios have been critical, I think, to writing pedagogy, and especially writing folks who think about teaching for transfer, because it is in the e-portfolios that they've seen the transfer's not occurring, right? Or they've seen the transfer is occurring, and they've seen the types of assignments that have been most beneficial to students acquiring skills in transfer. So e-portfolios have been critical for both students and for faculty and researchers. So e-portfolios is one. I think linked classes is another. I think maybe it's possible at some schools to think about grading practices, maybe grading at the end of a sequence of courses as opposed to grading each individual course. And if you graded at the end of a sequence of courses, that would allow you to give formative feedback all the way through. Let's say it was 3 courses. It would allow you to give formative feedback all the way through. And that formative feedback is, as we all know, and I'm sure you do as well, formative feedback is what it is that students grow from. More than grades, because grades become their own obsession. So those things I would say.
I'm Amani Shimi from Rhetoric and Composition and undergraduate research. One of the things we've struggled with here is that what happens beyond teaching for transfer? I mean, many of us in the language and writing and research classes at the freshman level will use strategies to help students perhaps transfer, okay? Well, that's what we try to equip them with. And then we're searching for faculty in the disciplines who will teach to sustain. And that's a conversation we've had often in our department. What happens after we teach? And then they go into the disciplines, and then there's little writing, for example, little critical reading. A lot of courses do not embed research. They don't expect students, in some departments, they don't expect students to do research at all. Okay, so the students might graduate, without really producing anything of depth and complexity and substance, except perhaps in the core curriculum. So are there conversations that are similar on other campuses? What kinds of strategies are being taken so that the conversation is one across departments and everybody is teaching to transfer and sustain and move forward? What happens there? Thank you.
So I think answering your question can go in a number of ways, and one is building on what we just talked about in relation to the Center for Teaching and Learning, and that is that you have something separate that is actually at stake for students. I know at AUC you have a co-curricular transcript. So you have a regular transcript, you have a co-curricular transcript. It's also possible to have something like an outcomes transcript. I'm going to call it that for lack of a better word. And the outcomes transcript could be portfolio-based, for instance, and students could show work that demonstrates their achievement of various outcomes over time. And if all faculty participated in having students build their outcomes portfolio, I think you would be able to break through some of the barriers. Of course, that's a big if. I understand that. That's a really big if. Another strategy is to have a top-down initiative that's part of strategic planning. So that's another way. And then faculty understand the importance of sort of moving in that direction. Bottom-down strategy can also emerge, but that takes a lot of work and would probably be a lot of work on the part of faculty in Red and Comp and the core curriculum to move in any kind of significant way through to the disciplines. At my school, we have faculty who teach in the core, in our general studies area, that also have a discipline appointment, and that gives them so automatically there's that connection that is built in, because they can take from what they learn in general studies or in the core and the outcomes in the core, and they can bring those to their discipline. Barring that, you might think about how to, and this can come through your center, I think, how to think about goals and outcomes at the institution level in relation to goals and outcomes for all programs, including core programs, but also programs that are outside of the core. But yeah, I mean, it's a critically difficult endeavor. I tend to take sneaky approaches sometimes with things, and that means communicating out to people in a fairly constant way, articles and ideas and news that are talking about trends in higher ed, and that those trends then can can become part of conversations in different contexts, committee meetings, for instance, where there's some shared governance and there's faculty presence from across the discipline. So I think those are also other strategies for somebody that's in an administrative position to take, I think, more than somebody that's in a faculty position. But I don't see any reason why a faculty member might not do that, send something out to the entire campus on a regular basis. But you would have to feel that you could do that with some confidence, and that it would have an effect on the campus. But beyond that, I mean, I think it's talking with your colleagues, going and attending, CTL events that are held, having conversations about the core curriculum in the context of disciplines, and raising those questions with your colleagues, specifically in contexts where you all actually congregate and talk about pedagogy. We have a summer workshop series. I know you have a professional development series where folks get certified. So those are contexts where I think you can really be instrumental in convincing colleagues, having them look at your work, look at your outcomes, have them understand the ways that their outcomes connect to your outcomes. So it's a lot of work, really.
Okay, I'm Aziz Elozi, and I'm the Associate Provost for Transformative Learning and Teaching.
Oh.
I have a question also that needs convincing faculty. What would you say to faculty who feel the responsibility of the content above all, and so do not have time to, or feel that they do not have time to compromise the transfer of the content, and hence do not have time to use any of these reflective pedagogies that lead to reflective learning and transfer? And it's mostly rushing through the content to finish what they have to finish, rather than what students have to learn.
I think we've done some really difficult things on my campus, some that have required significant buy-in from faculty, and not all faculty buy in. And I know this sounds really awful, but sometimes the faculty that don't buy in just have to be left aside. And you work with the faculty that actually do buy in, and as a result of peer pressure, some of those others will come along over time. Excuse me, our ELO, our Essential Learning Outcomes initiative was like that on our campus. We had a small core of people who, right from the get-go, got it, understood it, were very much bought in and became ambassadors for Essential Learning Outcomes. There was some skepticism on the part of some people, but they were willing to listen. And then there was the folks that just weren't going to buy in. We just let them be, and then moved to working with the core who had bought in, and then persuading those who were tentative but could listen. And as that group kind of grew into those who supported, some of those who hadn't bought in already started to see some value, because their friends who they never thought would have anything to do with essential learning outcomes were all of a sudden talking essential learning outcomes and using essential learning outcomes vocabulary with their students. So I think part of it is peer pressure, but part of it is just the practical and realistic understanding that you can't persuade everybody all the time of everything. So you go with who you can and start working from there. I mean, that would be my best answer to it. But it requires that you continue to work constantly and do the drumbeat and change it up as you're moving along. But I think at least we had success with essential learning outcomes. This is a conversation very much associated with essential learning outcomes, to my mind, and so I would say that it's possible. It's possible to bring people along over time. Maybe not immediately. It took us 3 years with essential learning outcomes.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex. I look forward to having you in my classroom on Wednesday.
Oh, excellent.
You'll be in the IEP with me. But I'm really interested in your perspective or even your defense because I'm looking at this slide and I see a lot of interdisciplinary, project-based, community-based projects. And I had a healthy serving of this for my undergrad. But the concept of a liberal arts education here is something far more abstract. And I know that in the US, the defense of a liberal arts education is almost necessary now. So I'm interested in what would be your defense or the particular things you would advocate for our students to say, this will be useful later in your liberal arts education. Because in our intensive program, there starts to be some animosity around the intensive English part, and then they just can't wait to get into their other programs and neglect or forget this English immersion.
One of the reasons that I think community-based internships, hands-on learning, learning that goes outside the classroom with students moving between the classroom and an external environment, one of the reasons I think that's really important is because students then start to see what's required of them. They can't learn in any kind of class, rather vocationally focused or not, they can't learn everything. They simply can't, but they can acquire the skills to learn more on their own when they leave, right? I think that's the really important point. They're not going to learn everything in a business class. They're not going to learn everything in a nursing class. They're not going to learn everything. But if they learn how to learn, right, and if they learn how to communicate what they learn to someone who's external to them, if they learn how to be ethical about the decision making in the context of what they're learning, then they're actually way better off than being reliant on all the content delivered in a classroom to supply them with all the knowledge that they need in order to perform well in the world outside. I think all of us who work know this, right? Getting students to understand it is the real challenge, and so having them work in life gives them that exposure that shows them, way better than we can, shows them that not everyone knows everything, that sometimes you have to learn something on the job, and what you need is the skills to be able to do that learning on the spot, think about it critically, and make judgments, and sometimes do that really quickly. And you can't do that if all you're relying on is the knowledge that you learned previously, because all that knowledge is always going to have gaps in it. I mean, it simply always will. So it's those skills for figuring out how to learn what you don't know, how to apply what you don't know, how to go farther than what you learned. Those are the skills I think that students really need. And it's the experiential piece that actually shows them the value of that, I think. That's just my opinion.
So hi, my name is Fareed. I study math, so I wanted to know how I could learn for transfer on my own. So I face a lot of teachers that teach me things, how to do things, but not why I do them. They don't teach me a method of learning. So I want to go beyond that. I want to know why I'm doing things. I want to carry on what I learned for the years in front of me. So I wanted to know as a student how I could do that.
Here are the people who are going to help you to do that. So seek them out. I mean, that's what you would do. You would seek out the people that would help you to do that learning. And I think they're here in this room with you. So, I mean, I know that's sort of a glib answer, but I also think it's true. There are some faculty who are this is gonna be what they want to help you with. And I think that you know that you want to be able to learn this, that you want to walk out of this university with this skill. So I would say seek out the folks who are here ready and willing and interested and skilled at being able to provide that for you. That would be my advice.
Thank you all for coming today, and let's thank Dr. Hood together for her wonderful lecture.